Now I do have a few of these ready to fly 400mm Warbirds. There is the P40 there and the Spitfire there. The P40 I've flown 4 times and the Spitfire 14 times currently. There's a Messerschmitt BF109. Here there is a Sport Cub and another Sport Cub. There's also an X450 intermediate flyer. And there were some changes with Sport Cub 1. When I bought that, the red and black stripes on the side were painted, and where you handled it, it would wear off, and so I would repaint them by hand. Now, being this is EPO foam with a texture to it, it doesn't come out completely straight. Now, Volantex, Sonic RC, whichever company it is, they fixed that issue, and with my second Sport Cub the stripes stay on, they're nice and straight too, and they have a clear film over them, and that clear film protects the red and black stripes, and so it doesn't wear off as you hand launch it. So that is an improved version of the Sport Cub, but that was the only way it was improved. Now the front wheels can tend to bend when you land, and if you keep straightening them up, in the end they will crack off, and then you'll need another set of undercarriage, and that happened to me. So now I leave that undercarriage in whatever configuration it is, slightly towed out I think. Still flies and it can still land. Now this early undercarriage, the foam wheels, is not as good as the new undercarriage. Here's the new undercarriage on the Spitfire. This is the same exactly on the Messerschmitt and the P40, and I suspect some of the others. And this is much nicer because it will free roll, so you can land on concrete, and I have done that. You've got to be careful when doing that, because of course if you hit the prop on the concrete while that's spinning, the prop will probably break, and I've broken a few props just because it's still spinning when the plane hits the ground. So you really do have to come off the power. You'll probably stall and it'll just land into the ground. If that's on grass, that's fine. So I won't worry about trying to do fancy landings on grass. Just try and get it down with that prop stationary. Of course, a 2-bladed prop is less prone to damage than a 3-bladed prop, because it's more likely to go horizontal when it lands and not snap. Also, one of the other things I noticed is that the spinner on the Spitfire is quite large, and on other planes such as the Messerschmitt it's quite small. Now if you buy a spare 3-bladed props, the spinner you get could be for one or the other, I guess, and so you need to look after your spinners. You can replace the props, but the spinners seem to be a little bit harder to get hold of. One of the other things, the differences between the early planes and the newer ones, is you've got your battery compartment here, but no way of getting into the motor or the electronics, the servos or anything in here. Not easily anyway, you'd have to cut the model apart. Whereas on the newer models such as this Spitfire, they have inspection hatches. There's one there for the motor, and then there's another one here, and this is really handy because you can get into the servos and gain access to things without damaging the model. So that is an improvement they've made over a year or so of producing these very fine models. They all weigh about 60 grams, the Spitfire does, including the battery. The Sport Cub weighs 64 grams. This is a 500mm plane, 500mm wingspan. The Spitfire is 400, and that means the Spitfire flies faster, it needs to fly faster. The Sport Cub can fly slower, and so this is a really good trainer. They're both really good trainers actually, but they do have different flying characteristics. This one will fly slower. So it's good for that. It doesn't have such good undercarriage, I don't think, but it does fly really nicely. So if you want some really slow flights, well, say there's a 7 mile an hour wind, you can fly in almost, I've even flown backwards, the P40 I've flown backwards. In a nice steady strong wind, you can with these planes. Do not fly in gusty conditions. Or if you do so, you do so at your own risk, because they're liable to just get lost. They can get taken away. You think you've got control and then all of a sudden, it's gone. This is the prop system and it pops off on landing to try and save the prop, and that often does do that. That's cool. Now, after a lot of those sort of incidents, the prop mount on the motor will wear, and that may need replacing if your propeller keeps coming off. When you do clip it on, you hear a little click, give it a tug, make sure it is on, and then run it up at full throttle. Make sure it doesn't fly away. Watch as you do that. If it does fly away, you've got to get that prop. It can go quite far. So these are a few of the hints and tips I've got for these models, having flown them a few times. Also, I've had judder on both the elevators or the rudders of these planes. Now, the way to get around that, if it's this is a problem my Sport Cub has got. Doing a funny little twitch. It means it can't find its centre point. If you've got an inspection hatch, open that up. With this Spitfire, I found it was the elevator had gone around 180 degrees and couldn't centre it. It wasn't in the right position, so I had to unplug all the power, turn it around to the correct position, then power it up again, and it centred fine. With the Sport Cub, I literally had to twist the rudder into a neutral position, manually pull these little rods just to get that servo in the correct position, then power it up again, and that fired up okay. These things are quite exposed on the P40. I smashed one of the servo horns off when I hit a metal basketball court, of all things. It's my own fault. I flew behind me and I'll get round all right, and I didn't. So always turn around and watch your plane. Don't do what I did and just think you're going around in the circle and you don't have to look, because you do really. I just clipped it, that smashed the servo horn. You can rotate these round, you're only using 2 of the 4 horns, so you can use one if it was slightly damaged. I got flying again straight away. But it's nice to have 1 or 2 spares. If you can't get spares easy, why not buy another plane? These planes are relatively cheap, so you can use one as a donor. Especially if you've got a damaged one. You get another one, use a damaged one as your donor. Now, which of these planes is my favourite? That's really hard to say. I learnt to fly on the Sport Cub 500 trainer. And both Sport Cub 1 and Sport Cub 2 I've got tremendous memories with. I've done all sorts of things, loops and rolls, multiple loops, 7 in a row. I've flown through goalposts, I've landed on the spot, I've followed a line, I've hovered, I've flown backwards, I've done all sorts. Even on Sport Cub 2 I put a little 11-gram camera, velcroed it to the roof, and it actually flew with that. Even though the whole thing only weighs 64 grams, it flew with that and it did loops and rolls. So that is pretty impressive. You have to put the camera just above the wing, as that's where the centre of lift is, otherwise you're going to overbalance it. It can actually do that. I'm impressed that these little foamies can. So I like the Sport Cub 500. That was the plane I learnt to fly on. I kind of got used to its looks. It's not a fighter, but it does look cool and it grows on you. So I really like this plane because it taught me to fly. My favourite fly though is this one, the Spitfire, and it's just because it's an iconic plane and the airframe is so good, it seems to fly so nicely. Having said that, the Messerschmitt flies nicest in expert mode, although more about expert mode in a minute. And my favourite plane in terms of its overall looks is the P40 Warhawk. So here is the P40 on this shelf over here. And I like the look of that so much. I've only flown it 4 times and I've kind of retired it. I haven't damaged it, so I want to keep it like that. Now let's talk a little bit about the controls. Now I'm not an experienced flyer, but I have flown the X450 intermediate flyer and then so far 5 of these 400mm Warbirds. And these are what taught me to fly. And I think if I can fly these, I could fly a larger trainer aircraft too. They do actually teach you to fly. And one of the ways they do that is they've got this control here, this button here. Easy, mid and expert mode, or beginner, mid and expert mode. And that basically switches off the stabilisation. 6-axis stabilisation, and they call it X-Pilot or something. It has all sorts of different names. Now it's a very clever piece of electronics in this plane that essentially helps it to fly. Now it's not like a drone. It won't just hover, it won't know where you are, it won't avoid trees, it doesn't know how off of the ground it is, it's got no GPS. But it does help stabilise it. And you need that with such a small plane, because in normal winds, very light winds even, this plane can get blown about easily. You just got to hold on to it and feel how much it is affected by the wind to know that. So having the stabilisation helps correct any wind issues. Not wind issues with you, wind issues with the wind. Anyway, when you're controlling the plane and you're throttling up and turning left and right, maybe turning left a bit faster using the rudder as well as the ailerons, and then going up and down, you want it to respond how you're telling it to control itself through these sticks. And without stabilisation, the wind can add all sorts of funny effects to that, and it can go where it wants. With the stabilisation, it will do what you're telling it to do. And I've repeatedly flown my planes past me between the camera and myself again and again and again and again, 10 times in a row. So you can fly this very, very accurately, even though it's a relatively inexpensive transmitter and one of the cheapest planes you can get. It can actually fly, and it can teach you to fly, and for that it must be commended. These things are actually flying. Now you can go from beginner mode, which restricts and slows down your movements a little. It kind of softens them, I should say, rather than slow them down. So you might tend to overcorrect when you're learning, and in beginner mode it compensates and helps you get through that stage. Therefore mid mode is probably the nicest mode, because now you've got a lot more authority on the controls. There's still some stabilisation though to smooth out the flight. That's something you need. So I fly in those 2 modes. If I want a nice easy relaxing flight, I'll still fly in beginner mode. And then I go for mid mode for a bit more excitement. It's very lively in mid mode, and that's good. In mid mode you can do loops manually, but you can't do a full roll. It will still stop you. So if you want to do a full roll in manual, you have to go to expert briefly, do your roll, and then go back into mid mode. Of course, you can try expert mode. I wouldn't recommend that. None of them seem to fly well in expert mode. They are all a tail heavy, they will want to climb. I suppose you could add some nose weight. I've tried trimming it up in expert mode and I still can't get it to really fly very nicely. So you can only do that for a few seconds. Do it while you're very high, and then once it goes out of control, just quickly switch it back to one of the other modes. Beginner mode is the nicest one because it would just auto level, get it under control and come back. And that is what I would suggest, is do not really try expert mode, even if you're an expert, because the planes are just very unstable. It doesn't take much of a wind to take them anywhere, and wind is it's not completely smooth. Maybe on a completely still day you could try it, and see how you get on. But otherwise just use the other two modes, beginner and intermediate mode. They are really good with a little bit of safety on, and you can fly happily all day long. So that is a really useful switch and has helped teach me to fly. Now on the other side there is the aerobatics button, and that is good. With one touch you can then say pull the stick back and it will do a roll, a loop I should say, for you. And if you press that button again it'll beep, and then you turn the stick to the left or right, it will do a roll, and it does it perfectly. And you kind of don't need to do them manually when you've got that. I mean you can sometimes, I kind of vary it. So a very simple controller. Some people use other controllers with these planes, but I like having one for each plane. I just do. I haven't got a load of planes, so that's fine. If this goes wrong, don't panic. You can rebind a new transmitter to your plane. You just power the plane up first, and it's all in the instructions, and then you switch this on and it will link that way. Normally you put your transmitter on first. So there you go. When you buy these, they only need 4 AA batteries, everything else is in there. It comes with a battery that you'll need to charge, and usually spare props, which is very useful. Use the 2-bladed prop when flying and the 3-bladed prop for display if it's that sort of plane. There are the AA's, and these have lasted me a year in some of my planes. And I've flown over 60 flights now with these 5 planes, so what can I say? They're just great fun. I thoroughly recommend them, and I hope some of these extra tips help you, because there are lots of people flying them for the first time who do not all know all of these extra things, so I'm just explaining a few little extra pointers for you. If you can't fly in expert mode, don't panic. I don't think anyone can. Not unless it's completely still, but just fly mid mode for the most fun, and beginner mode if you want an easy day. So there you go, that's it. You gotta love these planes, I do. One thing that I do when I come home from flying is you usually have to repair the aircraft in some way or another, and usually it's touching up the paint, and that's it. On this occasion I've also got to fix a prop. So first of all I glue it in position with some super glue, and then I mix up some epoxy resin and I'll fix that joint and paint it over. And then when I put the spinner on, that covers it. So there is my slither of epoxy glue on either side, just to strengthen that up around the super glue, and then that will be sprayed matte black. One thing I do is try and make sure that the propeller is flat and level and at the correct angle. Thing is, props are not expensive. I just do that for fun. I do have a whole selection of new props. It's nice to have a stock if you need them. Of course I've got a few radio control parts in there, and I also carry a few out in the field with me. So these are all sorts of screws and spare parts. The speedometer is in there, and also a lipometer, and that's useful if you want to read the power of your battery, which is a useful thing to do. You want to store lipos at 3.8 volts. That's my Sky RC GPS speedometer. And of course I have a selection of tools, screwdrivers and things, so I can change a prop or a component. The paint just chips off some models easier than others. The Spitfire seems to chip off I don't know if the newer Spitfires are improved, because the P40 and the Messerschmitt are really good. The paint doesn't seem to come off so easy on them so far. And the Sport Cub went through a transition, that changed, and it had stickers on the side which used to rub off, and now they don't. They've got a clear strip over the red and black stripes and they stay on. Now I use Citadel paints to touch the aircraft up with. I use black and white, of course, to get the shades, and then various shades of yellow and greens and browns and all sorts, just to mix up that correct colour. And then I stipple it on. The stippling is where you get a paintbrush and you just dab it on like that, and that doesn't give you brush strokes, it gives a nice sort of effect which blends in nicely with the sprayed effect that they come with. I also put my name and phone number on the bottom of the aircraft, just so that if I lose it, there's a chance someone might return it to me. There is the Spitfire, painted up and fixed up, made nice again, ready to fly.